That one glorious word represents more than just the geography between the Sabine and the Rio Grande. It represents a unique idea and way of life. A life of rugged individualism, proud self-reliance, gritty toughness, and fierce independence. That is what made Texas, and that is what will save her again. Howdy, folks. Sam Houston here. I want to thank you for tuning into the Feed Bandit podcast. Feed Bandit is the Texas first outdoors brand built by rabid Texans, for rabid Texans, and all those who aim to be one someday. We unapologetically promote the ideals that shape our Texas pride and Texas first patriotism through our love of hunting, the outdoors, and the gear and apparel we create. Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Check us out at feedbandit.com. And to repeat that great rallying cry from a former colleague of mine, liberty or death. Now, enough of my talking. Here are a couple of bandits that love Texas as much as I do. Enjoy.
Howdy, friend. Welcome back to the Feed Bandit podcast. Jimmy back with you. And on this episode, we're going to continue our Story Hour series. And this one will be a story by William Faulkner called Race at Morning. Interesting side note about William Faulkner. He is born in Oxford, Mississippi. Yes, we're Ole Miss. And I've been there. I've actually been to his grave. And what's interesting about it is, for those that don't know, people, for whatever reason, tend to leave empty booze bottles at his grave. Could be whiskey bottles, beer bottles, and everything, and also pennies. And when I went, there were empty whiskey bottles all over the place. And evidently, what I read about was Faulkner enjoyed whiskey, and a lot of people will put just any indiscriminate, bottle of whiskey there, probably whatever the cheapest thing they could find. But Faulkner actually preferred George Dickel. So if you ever go to Oxford, or ahead of time, maybe polish off a bottle of George Dickel and take that bottle with you and place it at Faulkner's grave. All right, well, let's start with the story, or read the story called Race at Morning. Although he was a highly prolific and critically acclaimed writer at the time, when William Faulkner went to work in Hollywood as a scriptwriter in the 1930s, his name was simply not well known. Nor did he have very much money, the real reason for his enlistment in the studios of Jack Warner. Turning his creative talents away from the legendary Yoknapatawapa County, can't pronounce that, he had created in his novels and stories, Faulkner was forced to leave his Oxford, Mississippi home and his prose to try his hand at writing for the silver screen. In the years ahead, the would-be Nobel Prize and many more internationally praised books and stories and immense fame would be his. But there in Hollywood, slogging through writing, cash and carry screen treatments and screenplays, William Faulkner was not a happy camper. As if he needed being reminded of his condition, there occurred an incident now famous among literary anecdotes. Southerner and hunter that he was, Faulkner anticipated the month of September with a passion. September meant dove hunting, and California had plenty of it back then. As Faulkner was headed for the dove fields with a Hollywood friend one day, a third member joined the party. He was the actor Clark Gable, also an avid hunter. Faulkner had never met Gable, and after he had settled into the car, Gable turned to Faulkner and said, "What do you do, Mr. Faulkner?" "Well, I'm a writer," Faulkner shot back instantly. "And what do you do, Mr. Gable?" Mr. Gable looked at Faulkner like he had been kicked in the groin. In retelling that story, my sense of fairness compels me to add that from many meetings I have heard and read, Clark Gable was a warm and generous man in person. While I was editor of Sports Afield, the legendary duck hunter and claybird authority Jimmy Robinson told me some wonderful stories about Clark Gable visiting his duck camp in Manitoba. From guides to cooks, everybody loved the real Clark Gable. It's too bad the world of hunting lost such a figure when Gable succumbed to coronary artery disease at such a relatively young age. Race at Morning is a William Faulkner story that originally appeared in the Saturday Evening Post and was later collected with many of his other stories that have hunting backgrounds in the book Big Woods, published by Random House in 1955. Among the tales included are Delta Autumn and a condensed version of the Faulkner classic The Bear. Although Faulkner was of an inquiring mind and quite experienced in international travel, he served as a pilot in the Lafayette Escadrille in World War I. William Faulkner's most famous literary works are set in the Mississippi he loved and knew so well. Books like The Sound and the Fury, As I Lay Dying, and The Bear are established literary landmarks. Short stories such as Delta Autumn, Two Soldiers, and That Evening Sun will be included in anthologies of classics as long as such books are published. I can't resist closing this with another Faulkner Hollywood anecdote. It seems that one day Faulkner phoned his boss, Jack Warner, and said, "Jack, I'm not feeling well. Do you mind if I try to work at home for a while?" "Of course not, Bill," Warner said. "I hope you feel better soon." A few weeks or so later, Warner happened to be looking for Faulkner. After some confusion, it was learned that Faulkner was back in Oxford, Mississippi. When he asked to go home, he really meant home. Oh well, I guess the poet T.S. Eliot was right when he said, "Home is where you start from." I was in the boat when I seen him. It was just dusk dark. I had just fed the horses and clumb back down the bank to the boat and shoved off to cross back to camp when I seen him, about half a quarter up the river, swimming, just his head above the water and at no more than a dot in the light. But I could see that rocking chair he toted on it, and I knowing it was him, going right back to that cane brake in the fork of the bayou where he lived all year until that day before the season opened, like the game wardens had given him a calendar, when he would clear out and disappear. Nobody knew where until the day after the season closed. But here he was, coming back a day ahead of time, like maybe he had gotten mixed up and was using last year's calendar by mistake. Which was just but too bad for him, because me and Mr. Ernest would be sitting on the horse right over him when the sun rose tomorrow morning. So I told Mr. Ernest, and we ate supper and fed the dogs, and then I hopped Mr. Ernest in the poker game, staying behind his chair until about 10 o'clock, when Roth Edmonds said, "Why don't you go to bed, boy?" "Or if you're going to get set up," Willie Legate said, "why don't you take a spelling book to set up over? He knows every cuss word in the dictionary, every poker hand in the deck, and every whiskey label in the distillery, but he can't even write his name. Can you?" he says to me. "I don't need to write my name down," I said. "I can remember in my mind who I am." "You're 12 years old," Walter Yule said. "Man to man now, how many days in your life did you ever spend in school?" "He ain't got no time to go to school," Willie Legate said. "What's the use in going to school from September to middle of November when I'll have to quit then to come in here and do Ernest's hearing for him? And what's the use in going back to school in January when in just 11 months it'll be November 15th again and he'll have to start all over again telling Ernest which way the dogs went?" "Well, stop looking into my hand anyway," Roth Edmonds said. "What's that? What's that?" Mr. Ernest said. He wore his listening button in his ear all the time, but he never brought the battery to camp with him because the cord would bound to get snagged every time he ran through a thicket. "Willie says for me to go to bed," I hollered. "Don't you ever call nobody mister," Willie said. "I call Mr. Ernest mister," I said. "All right," Mr. Ernest said. "Go to bed then. I don't need you." "Well, that ain't no lie," Willie said. "Deaf or no deaf, he can hear a $50 raise if you don't even move your lips." So I went to bed, and after a while, Mr. Ernest came in, and I wanted to tell him again how big them horns looked even half a quarter away in the river. Only I would have had to holler, and only time Mr. Ernest agreed he couldn't hear was when he would be setting on Dan, waiting for me to point which way the dogs was going. So we just laid down, and it wasn't no time when Simon was beating the bottom of the dishpan with the spoon, hollering, "Raise up and get your 4 o'clock coffee." And I crossed the river in the dark this time, with the lantern, and fed Dan and Roth Edmonds' horse. It was going to be a fine day, cold and bright. Even in the dark, I could see the white frost on the leaves and the bushes. Just exactly the kind of day that big old son of a gun laying up there in the brake would like to run. Then we ate and set the stand holder across for Uncle Ike and McCaslin to put them on the stands where he thought they'd ought to be, because he was the oldest one in camp. He'd been hunting deer in these woods for about 100 years, I reckon, and if anybody would know where a buck would pass, it would be him. Maybe with a big old buck like this one, that had been running the woods for what would amount to 100 years in the deer's life, too, him and Uncle Ike would surely manage to be at the same place at the same time this morning, provided, of course, he managed to get away from me and Mr. Ernest on the jump, because me and Mr. Ernest was going to get him. Then me and Mr. Ernest and Roth Edmonds sent the dogs over, with Simon holding Eagle and the other old dogs on leash, because the young ones, the puppies, wasn't going nowhere until Eagle let them know how. Then me and Mr. Ernest and Roth saddled up, and Mr. Ernest got up, and I handed him his pump gun, and I let Dan's bridle go for him to get rid of the spell of bucking he had to get shut of every morning until Mr. Ernest hit him between the ears with the gun barrel. Then Mr. Ernest loaded the gun and give me the stirrup, and I got up behind him, and we taken the fire road up toward the bayou, the 4 big dogs dragging Simon along in front with a single-barrel breech loader slung on a piece of plow line across his back, and the puppies moiling along in everybody's way. It was light now, and it was going to be just fine. The east already yellow for the sun, and our breath spoken in the cold, still bright air until the sun would come up and warm it, and a little skim of ice in the ruts, and every leaf, twig, and switch, and even frozen clouds frosted over, waiting to sparkle like a rainbow when the sun finally came up and hit 'em. Until all my insides felt light and strong as a balloon, full of that light, cold, strong air, so that it seemed to me like I couldn't even feel the horse's back as I straddled of, just the hot, strong muscles moving under the hot, strong skin, setting up there without no weight at all, so that when old Eagle struck and jumped, me and Dan and Mr. Ernest would go just like a bird, not even touching the ground. It was just fine. When that big old buck got killed today, I know that even if he had put it off another 10 years, he couldn't have picked a better one. And sure enough, as soon as we come to the bayou, we seen his foot in the mud where he had come up out of the river last night, spread in the soft mud like a cow's foot, big as a cow's, big as a mule's, with Eagle and the other dogs laying into the leash rope, now until Mr. Ernest told me, jump down and help Simon hold him, because me and Mr. Ernest knowed exactly where he'd be, a little canebrake island in the middle of the bayou, where he could lay up until whatever doe or little deer the dogs happened to jump could go up or down the bayou in either direction and take the dogs on away, so he could steal out and creep back down the bayou to the river and swim it, and leave the country like he was done the day the season opened. Which is just what we never aimed for him to do this time. So we left Roth on his horse to cut him off and turn him over Uncle Ike's standers, as if tried to slip back down the bayou, and me and Simon with the leash dogs walked up the bayou until Mr. Ernest on the horse said it was fur enough. Then turned up into the woods about half-quarter above the break, because the wind was going to be south this morning when it rise, and turned down towards the break, and Mr. Ernest give the word to cast them, and we slipped the leash, and Mr. Ernest gave me the stirrup again, and I got up. Old Eagle had done already took off, because he knew where that old son of a gun would be laying as good as we did, not making no racket at all yet, but yes, boring on through the buck vines with the other dogs trailing along behind him, and even Dam seemed to know about that buck too, beginning to supple up and jump a little through the vines, so that I had taken my holt on Mr. Ernest's belt already before the time it had come for Mr. Ernest to touch him. Because when we got strung out, going fast behind a deer, I wasn't on Dan's back much of the time nohow, but mostly just strung out from my holt on Mr. Ernest's belt, so that Willie Legate said that what we was going through the woods fast, it looked like Mr. Ernest had a boy-side pair of empty overalls blowing out of his hind pocket. So it wasn't even a strike, it was a jump. Eagle must have walked right up behind him, or maybe even stepped on him while he was laying there, still thinking it was the day after tomorrow. Eagle just throwed his head back and up and said, "There he goes," and we even heard the buck crashing through the first of the cane. Then all the other dogs was hollering behind him, and Dan gave a squat to jump, but it wasn't against the curb this time, not just the snaffle, and Mr. Ernest let him down into the bayou and swung around the break and up the other bank. Only he never had to say which way, because I was already pointing past his shoulder, freshening my Holt on the belt just as Mr. Ernest touched Dan with that big old rusty spur on his high heel. Because when Dan felt it, he would go off just like a stick of dynamite, straight through whatever he could bust, and over and under what he couldn't. Over it like a bird, or under it, crawling on his knees like a mole or a big coon, with Mr. Ernest still on him, because he had the saddle to hold on to, and me still there, because I had Mr. Ernest to hold on to me. Me and Mr. Ernest not riding him, but just going along with him, provided we held on, because when the jump came, Dan never cared who else was there neither. I believe to my soul he could have cast and run them dogs by himself without me or Mr. Ernest or Simon or nobody. That's what he'd done. He had to. The dogs was always almost out of hearing. Eagle must have been looking right up that big son of a gun's tail until he finally decided he better get it on out of there. And now they must have been getting pretty close to Uncle Ike's standards. And Mr. Ernest reined Dan back and held him, squatting and bouncing and trembling like a mule having his tail roached, while we listened for shots. But never none come, and I hollered to Mr. Ernest, "We better go on a while." Well, I could still hear the dogs, and he left Dan off, but still there was no shots. And now we knew the race had done already passed the standards, like the old son of a gun actually was a haunt, like Simon and the other field hand said he was, and we busted out of the thicket. And sure enough, there was Uncle Ike and Willie standing beside his foot in the soft patch. Quote, "He got through us all," Uncle Ike said. "I don't know how he done it. I just had a glimpse of him. He looked big as an elephant with a rack on his head you could cradle a yelling calf in. He went right down on the ridge. You better get on too. That hog bayou camp might not miss him." So I freshened my Holt, and Mr. Ernest touched Dan again. The ridge ran due south. It was clear of vines and bushes, so he could go fast into the wind, too, because it had risen now, and now the sun was up, too, though I hadn't had time to notice it, bright and strong and level through the woods, shining and sparkling like a rainbow on frosted leaves. So we would hear the dogs again at any time now, as the wind got up. We could make time now, but still holding Dan back to the canter, because it was either going to be quick when he got down to the standards from the Hog Bayou camp 8 miles below or a long time in case he got by them too. And sure enough, after a while we heard the dogs. We was walking Dan now to let 'em blow a while, and we heard them, the sound coming faint up the wind. Not running now, but trailing, because the big son of a gun had decided a good piece back, probably, to put an end to his foolishness, and picked himself up and suppled out and put up about a mile between himself and the dogs, until he run up on them other standards from that camp below. I could almost see him stop behind a bush, peeping out and saying, "What's this? What's this? Is this whole darn country full of folks this morning?" Then looking back over his shoulder at where Old Eagle and the others was hollering along after him, while we decided much time he had decided what to do next. Except he almost shaved it too fine. We heard the shots. It sounded like a war. Old Eagle must have been looking right up his tail again, and he had to bust on through the best way he could. Pow, 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 and then pow, 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 like it must have been 3 or 4 ganged right up on him before he had time to swerve, and me hollering, "No, no, no, no," because he was our'n. It was our beans and oats he ate, and our breakfast he laid in. We had been watching him every year, and it was like we had raised him, to be killed at last on our jump in front of our dogs by some strangers that would probably try to beat the dogs off and drag him away before we could even get a piece of the meat. "Shut up and listen," Mr. Ernest said. So I done it, and we could hear the dogs, not just the others, but Eagle too, not trailing no scent now, and not baying and no down meat either, but running hot on slight long after the shooting was over. I just had time to freshen my Holt. Yesterday was running on sight. Like Willie Legate would say, if Eagle just had a drink of whiskey, he would catch that deer. Going on, done already gone when we broke out of the thicket, and seen the fellers that had done the shooting, 5 or 6 of them, squatting and crawling around, looking at the ground and bushes, like maybe if they had looked hard enough, spots of blood would bloom out on the stalks and leaves, like frogs' tools or hallberries, with the old Eagle still in hearing, and still telling them that the blood they found wasn't coming out of nothing in front of them. "Have any luck, boys?" Mr. Ernest said. "I think I hit him," one of them said. "I know I did. We're hunting blood now." Well, when you find him, blow your horn and I'll come back and tote him into the camp for you, Mr. Ernest said. So we went on, going fast now, because the race was almost out of hearing again, going fast, too, like not just the buck, but the dogs, too, had took a new leash on life from all the excitement and shooting. We was in strange country now, because we had never had to run this fur before. We had always killed before now. Now we had come to Hog Bayou that runs into the river a good 15 miles below our camp. It had water in it, not to mention a mess of downed trees and logs and such, and Mr. Ernest checked Dan again, saying, "Which way?" I could just barely hear him, off to the east a little, like the old son of a gun had given up the idea of Vicksburg or New Orleans like he at first seemed to have, and he had decided to have a look at Alabama, maybe since he was already up and moving. So I pointed and we turned up the bayou, hunting for a crossing, and maybe we could find a one, except that I reckon Mr. Ernest decided we never had time to wait. We come to a place where the bayou had narrowed down to about 12 or 15 feet, and Mr. Ernest said, "Look out, I'm going to touch him." And done it. I didn't even have time to freshen my hold when he was already in the air, and I seen the vine. It was a loop of grapevine, nigh as big as my wrist, looping down right across the middle of the bayou. And I thought he seen it too, and was just waiting to grab it and fling it up over our heads to go under it. And I know Dan seen it, because he even ducked his head to jump under it. But Mr. Ernest never seen it at all until it scun him back along Dan's neck and hooked under the head of the saddle horn. Us flying on through the air, the loop of the vine getting tighter and tighter until something somewhere was going to have to give. It was the saddle girth. It broke, and Dan going on scrambling up on the other bank, bare naked except for the bridle, and me and Mr. Ernest in the saddle, Mr. Ernest still sitting in the saddle holding the gun, and me holding on to Mr. Ernest's belt, hanging in the air over the bayou in the tightened loop of that vine, like a dawn-back loop of a big rubber-banded slingshot, until it snapped back and shot us back across the bayou, and flaying us clear, me still holding on to Mr. Ernest's belt, and on the bottom now, so that when we lit, I would have had Mr. Ernest and the saddle both on top of me if I hadn't climbed fast around the saddle and up Mr. Ernest's side, so that when we landed, it was the saddle first, then Mr. Ernest, and me on top, until I jumped up and Mr. Ernest still laying there with just the white rim of his eyes showing. "Mr. Ernest," I hollered, and then climbed down to the bayou and scooped my cap full of water and clumb back and thrown it in his face, and he opened his eyes and laid there on the saddle, cussing me. "God dog it," he said, "why didn't you stay behind where you started out?" "Well, you was the biggest," I said. "You would have mashed me flat." "What do you think you done to me?" Mr. Ernest said. "Next time, if you can't stay where you start out, jump clear. Don't climb on top of me no more, you hear?" "Yes, sir," I said. So he got up then, still cussing and holding his back, and clubbed down to the water and dipped some in his hand onto his face and his neck, dipping some more up and drunk it. And I drunk some too, and clumb back and got the saddle and the gun, and recrossed the bayou on the down logs. If we could just catch Dan, not that he would have went 15 miles back to camp, because if anything, he would have went on by himself to try to help Eagle catch that buck. But he was about 50 yards away, eating buck vines, so I brought him back, and we taken Mr. Ernest's galluses and my belt and the weighing leather loop off Mr. Ernest's horn and tied the saddle back on Dan. It didn't look like much, but it would hold. "Provided you don't let me jump him through no more grapevines without hollering first," Mr. Ernest said. "Yes, sir," I said. "I'll holler first next time, provided you'll holler a little quicker when you touch him next time, too." But it wasn't all right. We just had to be a little easy getting up. "Now which way?" I said, because we couldn't hear now after washing all this time, and this was a new country, sure enough. It had been cut over and grown up in thickets we couldn't have seen over ever standing up on Dan. But Mr. Ernest never even answered. He just turned Dan along the bank of the bayou where it was a little more open, and we could move faster again. Soon as Dan and us got used to the homemade cinch strap and got a little confidence in it, which just happened to be east, or so I thought, because I never paid no particular attention to the east, then because the sun, I don't know, where the morning had went, but it was gone, and the morning and frost too, was high up now, even if my insides told me it was past dinner time. And then we heard 'em. No, that's wrong. What we heard was shots, and that was when we realized how far we had come, because the only camp we knew about in that direction was the Hollyno camp, and the Hollyno was exactly 28 miles from Van Dorn, where me and Mr. Ernest live. Just the shots, no dogs nor nothing. If Old Eagle was still behind him and the buck was still alive, he was too wore out now to even say, "Here he comes." "Don't touch him," I hollered, but Mr. Ernest remembered that cinch strap too, and he just let Dan off the snaffle. And Dan heard them shots too, picking his way through the thickets, hopping the vines and logs when he could, and going under them when he couldn't. And sure enough, it was just like before, 2 or 3 men squatting and creeping along the bushes, looking for blood that Eagle had done already told them wasn't there. But we never stopped this time, just trotting on by with Dan hopping and dodging him on the brush and vines, dainty as a dancer. Then Mr. Ernest swung Dan until we was going due north. "Wait," I hollered, "not this way." But Mr. Ernest just turned his face back over his shoulder. It looked tired too, and there's a smear of mud on it where the grapevine had snatched him off the horse. "Don't you know where he's heading?" he said. He done his part, give everybody a fair open shot at him, and now he's going home, back to that break in our bayou. He ought to make it exactly at dark." And that's what he was doing. We went on. It didn't matter to hurry now. There wasn't no sound nowhere. It was that time in the early afternoon in November when nothing moved nor cried, not even birds or the peckerwoods, yellowhammers and jays, and it seemed to me like I could see all 3 of us, me and Mr. Ernest and Dan, and Eagle, and the other dogs, and that big old buck, moving through the quiet woods in the same direction, headed for the same place, not running now, but walking. That had all run the fine race as the best we knew how, and all 3 of us now turned like on an agreement to walk back home, not together in a bunch, because we didn't want to worry or tempt one another, because what we had all 3 spent this morning doing was no play acting just for fun, but was serious, and all 3 of us was still what we was, that old buck that had to run, not because he was skeered, but because running was what he had done best and was proudest at, and Eagle and the dogs that chased him, not because they hated or feared him, but because that was the thing they had done best and was proudest at. And me and Mr. Ernest and Dan, that run him not because we wanted his meat, which would be too tough to eat anyhow, or his head to hang on a wall, but because now we could go back and work hard for 11 months making a crop, so we'd have to have the right to come back here next November. All 3 of us going back home now, peaceful and separate, but still side by side, until the next time. Then we'd see him for the first time. He was out of the cut over now. We could even cantered, except all 3 of us was long past that, and now you could tell where west was because the sun already halfway down it. So we was walking too, when we come on the dogs, the puppies and one of the old ones, played out, laying in a little wet snag, panting, just looking up at us when we passed, but not moving when we went on. Then we come to a long open glade. You could see about half a quarter. And when we seen the 3 other old dogs, and about 100 yards ahead of them, Eagle, all walking, not making no sound, and then suddenly, at the fur end of the glade, the buck hisself getting up from where he had been resting for the dogs to come, getting up without no hurry, big as a mule, tall as a mule, and turned with no hurry, still, and the white underside of his tail for the second or 2 before the thicket taking him. It might have been a signal, a goodbye, a farewell. Still walking, we passed the other 3 dogs in the middle of the glade, laying down, too, now just where they was when the buck vanished, and not trying to get up neither when we passed. And still that 100 yards ahead of them. Eagle, too, not laying down because he was still on his feet, but his legs was spraddled and his head was down, maybe just waiting until he was out of sight of his shame. His eyes plain as talk when we passed. "I'm sorry, boys, but this here is all." Mr. Ernest stopped Dan. "Jump down and look at his feet," he said. "Ain't nothing wrong with his feet," I said. "It's his wind has done give out." "Jump down and look at his feet," Mr. Ernest said. So I done it, and while I was stooping over Eagle, I could hear the pump gun go snick-cluck, snick-cluck, snick-cluck 3 times, except that I never thought nothing then. Maybe he was just running the shells through to be sure it would work when he'd seen him again, or maybe to make sure they were all buckshot. Then I got up again, and we went on, still walking, a little west of north now, because when we'd seen his white flag that second or 2 before the thicket hit it, it was on a beeline for that notch in the bayou. And it was evening, too, now. The wind had done dropped, and there was an edge to the air, and the sun just touched the top of the trees now, except just now and then, when it found a hole to come almost level through onto the ground. And he was taking the easiest way, too, now, going straight as he could. When we'd seen his foot in the soft places, he was running for a while at first after his rest. But soon he was walking, too, like he knowed, too, where Eagle and the dogs were. And then we'd seen him again. It was the last time. A thicket, with the sun coming through a hole onto it like searchlight. He crashed just once. Then he was standing there broadside to us, not 20 yards away, big as a statue and red as gold in the sun, and the sun sparkling on the tips of his horns. They was 12 of them, so that he looked like he had 12 lighted candles branched around his head, standing there looking at us, while Mr. Ernest raised the gun and aimed at his neck. And the gun went click, snick cluck, click, snick cluck, click, snick cluck, 3 times, and Mr. Ernest still holding the gun aimed while the buck turned and gave one long bound, the white underside of his tail like a blaze of fire, too, until the thicket and the shadows put it out. And Mr. Ernest laid the gun slow and gentle back across the saddle in front of him, saying quiet and peaceful, and not much louder than just breathing, "God dog, God dog." Then he jogged me with his elbow, and we got down, easy and careful because of that cinch strap, and he reached into his vest and taken out one of his cigars. It was busted where I'd fallen on it, I reckon, when we hit the ground. He throwed it away and taken out the other one. It was busted too, so he bit off a hunk of it to chew and throwed the rest away. And now the sun was gone even from the tops of the trees, and there wasn't nothing left but a big red glare in the west. "Don't worry," I said. "I ain't going to tell them you forgot to load your gun. For that matter, they don't need to know we ever seed 'em." "Much obliged," Mr. Ernest said. There wasn't going to be no moon tonight either. So he'd taken the compass off the wang leather loop in his buttonhole and handed me the gun and set the compass on a stump, stepped back and looked at it. "Just about the way we're headed now," he said, and taking the gun from me, opened it, and put one shell in the breech, and taken up the compass, and I'd taken Dan's reins, and we started, with him in front and the compass in his hand. And after a while it was full dark. Mr. Ernest would have to strike a match every now and then to read the compass until the stars come out good and we could pick our one to follow. Because I said, "How far you reckon it is?" he said. "A little more than 1 box of matches." So we used a star when we could, only when we couldn't see it all the time because the woods was too dense, and we'd get a little off until he would have to spend another match. And now it was good and late, and he stopped and said, "Get on the horse." "I ain't tired," I said. "Get on the horse," he said. "We don't want to spoil him." Because he had been a good feller ever since I had knowed him, which is even before a day or two ago, when Ma went off with the Vicksburg Roadhouse feller, and the next day Pop didn't come home neither, and on the third one Mr. Ernest rid Dan up to the door of the cabin on the river he let us live in. So Pop could work his piece of land and run his fish line too, and said, "Put that gun down and come on up here and climb up behind." So I got in the saddle even if I couldn't reach the stirrups, and Mr. Ernest taking the reins, and I must have went to sleep, because the next thing I knowed, a buttonhole of my lumberjack was tied to the saddle horn with that air wang cord off the compass. And it was good and late now, and we wasn't fur because Dan was already smelling water, the river. Or maybe it was the feedlot itself he smelled, because we struck the road not a quarter below it, and soon I could see the river too, with the white mist laying on it soft, still as cotton. Then the lot home, and up yonder in the dark, not no piece actually close enough to hear us unsaddling, and shucking corn probably, and surely close enough to hear Mr. Ernest blowing his horn at the dark camp for Simon to come in the boat and get us. That old buck in his break in the bayou. Home too, resting too, after the hard run, waking himself now and then, dreaming of dogs behind him, or maybe it was the racket he was making would wake him. But neither of them for more than just a little while before sleeping again. Then Mr. Ernest stood on the bank blowing until Simon's lantern went bobbing down into the mist. Then we climbed down to the landing, and Mr. Ernest blowed again now and then to guide Simon until we could see the lantern in the mist, and then Simon in the boat. Only it took every time I sat down and got still, I went back to sleep because Mr. Ernest was shaking me again to get out and climb the bank into the dark camp until I felt the bed against my knees and tumbled into it. Then it was morning, tomorrow. It was all over now until next November, next year, and we could come back. Uncle Ike and Willie and Walter and Roth and the rest of 'em had come in yesterday, soon as Eagle had taken the buck out of hearing, and they knowed the deer was gone, to pack up, be ready to leave this morning for Yaknapakatawawa, where they lived until it would be November again, and they could come back again. So as soon as we ate breakfast, Simon run them back up the river in the big boat to where they left the cars and pickups. And now it wasn't nobody but just me and Mr. Ernest sitting on the bench again against the kitchen wall in the sun. Mr. Ernest smoking a cigar, a whole one this time, that Dan hadn't had no chance to jump him through a grapevine and bust. He hadn't washed his face neither, where that vine had thrown him to the mud. But that was all right, too. His face usually did have a smut of mud or tractor grease or beard stubbled on it, because he wasn't just a planter, he was a farmer. He worked as hard as his hands intended, which is why I knowed him from my very first time that we would get along, that I wouldn't have no trouble with him, and he wouldn't have no trouble with me. From that very first day when I woke up, and Ma had done gone off with that Vicksburg Roadhouse feller without even wanting to cook breakfast. And the next morning, Pap was gone too, and it was almost night the next day when I heard a horse coming up. And I'd taken the gun that I'd already throwed a shell into the britch when Pap never come home last night and stood in the door while Mr. Ernest rid up and said, "Come on, your pa ain't coming back neither." "You mean he given me to you?" I said. "Who cares?" he said. "Come on, I bought a lock for the door. We'll send the pickup back tomorrow for whatever you want." So I come home with him, and it was all right. It was just fine. His wife had died about 3 years ago, with no women to worry us or take off in the middle of the night with a darn Vicksburg Roadhouse Jake, without even wanting to cook breakfast. And we would go home this afternoon too, but not just yet. We always stayed one more day after the others left because Uncle Ike always left what grub they had in it, and the rest of the homemade corn whiskey he drunk, and that town of whiskey of Roth, Edmunds's, he called Scotch, that smelled like it come out of an old bucket of roof paint, setting in the sun for one more day before he went back home to get it ready to put in next year's crop of cotton and oats and beans and hay. And across the river yonder, behind the wall of trees where the big woods started, that old buck laying up today in the sun, too, resting today, too, without nobody to bother him until next November. So at least one of us was glad it would be 11 months and 2 weeks before he'd have to run that fur that fast again. So he was glad of the very same thing we was sorry of. And so all of a sudden I thought about how maybe planting and working and harvesting oats and cotton and beans and hay wasn't just something me and Mr. Ernest done 351 days to fill the time until we could come back hunting again, but it was something we had to do, and do honest, and do during the 351 days to have the right to come back into the woods and hunt for the other 14. And the 14 days that old buck run in front of dogs wasn't just something to fill his time until the 351 when he didn't have to, but the running and the risking in front of guns and dogs was something he had to do for 14 days to have the right not to be bothered for the other 351. And so the hunting and the farming wasn't two different things at all. It was just the other side of each other. "Yes," I said, "all we got to do now is put in next year's crop. Then November won't be no time away at all." "You ain't going to put in the crop next year," Mr. Ernest said. "You're going to school." So at first I didn't even believe what I had heard him. "What?" I said. "Me go to school?" "Yes," Mr. Ernest said. "You must make something out of yourself." "I am," I said. "I'm doing it now. I'm going to be a hunter and a farmer like you." "No," Mr. Ernest said. "That ain't enough anymore. Time was when all a man had to do was just farm 11.5 months and hunt the other half. But not now. Now just to belong to the farming business and the hunting business ain't enough. You got to belong to the business of mankind." "Mankind?" I said. "Yes," Mr. Ernest said. "So you're going to school because you got to know why. You can belong to the farming and hunting business, and you can learn the difference between what's right and wrong and do right. And that used to be enough, just to do right. But not now. You got to know why it's right and why it's wrong, and be able to tell the folks that never had no chance to learn it. Teach them how to do what's right, not just because they know it's right, but because they know why it's right, because you just showed them, told them, taught them why. So you're going to school. It's because you've been listening to that darn Will Legate and Walter Ewell, I said. No, Mr. Ernest said. Yes, I said. No wonder you missed that buck yesterday, taking ideas from the very fellers that let him get away after me, and you had run Dan and the dogs darn not clean to death, because you never even missed him. You never forgot to load the gun. You had done already unloaded it on purpose. I heard you. All right, Mr. Ernest said. Which would you rather have? His bloody head and a hide on the kitchen floor yonder, and half his meat in a pickup truck on the way to Yoknapawatawa, County? Or him, with his head and hide and meat still together, over yonder in that break, waiting for next November for us to run him again? And get him, too, I said. We won't even fool with no Willie Legate or Walter Ewell next time. Maybe, Mr. Ernest said. Yes, I said. Maybe, Mr. Ernest said. The best word in our language, the best of all. That's what mankind keeps going on. Maybe. The best days of his life ain't the ones when he said yes beforehand. They're the ones when all he knew to say was maybe. He can't say yes until afterward, because he's not only don't know it till then, he don't want to know. He don't want to know yes until then. Step in the kitchen and make me a toddy. Then we'll see about dinner. All right, I said. I got up. You want some of Uncle Ike's corn or that town whiskey of Roth Edmonds's? Can you say Mr. Roth or Mr. Edmonds? Mr. Ernest said. Yes, sir, I said. Well, which do you want? Uncle Ike's corn or that air stuff of Roth Edmonds's? The end. That was interesting. An interesting little story about a failed hunt, but a learning lesson, for sure. That sounded pretty intense, too. Much more intense than simply going and sitting in a deer blind and sitting over a corn feeder. The good old days, I guess. I don't know. But the interesting way to hunt, a different way to hunt differently in Mississippi than what a lot of us here in Texas nowadays are used to. But interesting story nonetheless. I hope you enjoyed that story by William Faulkner. And in this edition of Story Hour, the Feed Bandit Story Hour. All right, well, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you on the next one. Remember, support your local feed store. All right, you take care.
Well, I hope the Bandits gave you an interesting episode that either entertained or educated you. Or better yet, both. Hell, I told them this podcasting thing looks harder to do than defeating Santa Anna. So if you would, please help them out by sharing it with all your like-minded friends to help the Bandits get the word out. And don't forget to check us out at feedbandit.com and grab some gear and apparel to support the cause of Texas. Remember, Texas, above all else, preserve the tradition, protect the legacy. Finally, as I said some time ago on the eve of the great battle, and I vigorously repeat here again, be men, be free men, that your children may bless their father's name. Well, fellow bandit, until next time.